All right, let's get started. Okay, so today's webinar is about a topic that is actually pretty important. And it's important for attorneys kind of at all levels, but it's especially important for people that may be senior and think you can't get a job, or people that are, regardless of your situation, if you're, a senior attorney and you're worried that you're unemployable. It's also for junior attorneys that kind of maybe under the belief that to ever succeed in as an attorney, you're going to need to develop a large book of business, and this is like really the only thing you can do. And the truth of the matter is, and I'll just kind of say it right now at the beginning, is that it doesn't really matter at any point in your career if you're unable to develop a large book of business or any book of business, because there's always people that will hire you. And most attorneys are not really aware of how large the market is, but there are literally tens of thousands of law firms and cities all over the country, in small cities and large cities and different places, where if you have some sort of expertise, whether it's being a litigator, or whether it's being a corporate attorney, or really whatever you do, they're always going to be employable. You just need to be able to look at enough places and understand kind of how to look and understand why this dynamic is there. And what makes me upset is, in the 25 plus years I've been doing this, I've seen so many attorneys give up, so many people take positions that they don't have to take, that are beneath them, so many people that stay unemployed because they don't know how to look for a job, so many people that feel defeated, and it's very sad. And it's sad that it happens to older attorneys, and it's sad that it happens to younger attorneys as well. And I know so many examples of people that got senior inside of law firms. They worked very hard for 10 or 15 years of their life. And then for whatever reason, the firm that they were didn't have work at a senior level, and they lost their jobs. And then they basically never worked in law firms again, and often took positions in the government or in-house and things that were really beneath their skill set. So I'm going to talk to you today about why law firms will hire you if you're senior, even if you don't think they will, the type of law firms to look for. And one of the things I'd also say that's important is, even if you're not a senior attorney, I'm going to talk to you today about a lot of job search tactics and ways to look for a position that most attorneys aren't aware of and most attorneys don't understand. So I'm going to help you today, regardless of what level you're at, learn how to, get a position. So I started recruiting in late 1990s. And what was unusual at the time is, what was happening is all the recruiters in the market were older recruiters, and they were following this kind of whole business model where they would get list of attorneys, and then they would get jobs from law firms, and then they would basically call everyone that they could find in the market. And believe it or not, I mean, it's so long ago that none of these recruiting firms had websites. And then when they did get websites, they were just kind of with their logo and their name and no content on them. And they didn't even know about advertising online. These people knew nothing about, online advertising or anything. And so I was, a young attorney. And back then, young attorneys were searching on websites like Monster, Career Builder, and Hot Jobs, and there are all these websites. And so I started putting ads on there. And I was one of the first attorneys in first recruiting firms in the country to start advertising online. And a lot of these other firms that weren't actually unemployed in business, but I started doing that. And then a lot of the attorneys who were finding me were senior attorneys that didn't have business. A lot of them had been unemployed for a long time. But what interested me about them is many of them had been, partners in large prestigious law firms, or they were. And just because of that, I had a lot of respect for them, and they had good records, but they weren't people that most people thought were employable. And every recruiter out there that takes phone calls or gets resumes sent to them will always receive a lot of resumes from senior attorneys without business, and they will receive them constantly, because senior attorneys without business are often looking for jobs because they're not having a good time at their existing firm, being let go, or they're unemployed, or whatever it is. But senior attorneys have a much more difficult time in the profession, getting positions. And so what happens is with those people is that for the most part, other recruiters will take a look at those recruiters, those candidates, and think, it's a waste of their time. They can't help them. They try to get them off the phone. And, it's in the recruiting, what I do is kind of an art form, and you need to understand things at a different level than the things that you need to see things that other people may not see. And in the recruiting industry, I saw and believed that these candidates would be placed. And so, when I was a few months into recruiting, I was working with so many of these people that I was approached by a publication that was putting together some sort of a recruiting director. I think it was the National Law Journal. And they had this space what you could list, like what you're a specialist in. And I wrote replacing senior attorneys without business, which no one in the world would write that. And when that happened, I started getting all these inquiries from all these partners without business. And I was starting this new recruiting firm. And so I didn't have a lot of candidates. So I, take these people on. And a lot of these, senior people had just been hearing no, no, no from recruiters. And so a lot of them were, like you're just, pretty astonished that I was showing interest in them. And I was, because I thought, wow, these people are big firms, they must be good attorneys. But I didn't really know how to recruit when I was starting. I started a recruiting firm with just a ton of enthusiasm, but I didn't know the rules. And so if I'd gone to another recruiting firm, I'd been told not to work with these people, but I did. And I meet these attorneys, and that no one else was doing that. And I meet them, and a lot of them would look, very beaten down. They would be unhappy. They would be depressed, and they'd been told they weren't marketable. A lot of them felt, because of their experience in law firms, that they weren't marketable. There's something wrong with them. And, just as a quick aside, like a lot of law firms, if you're a senior and you don't have any business, you're just kind of, you're there, and people will, give you work. You're there to get work, but they won't be nice to you. Like a lot of times, senior attorneys without business, like people aren't nice to them because they don't have work. And some people will, give them work. When they give them work, it's almost like they're doing them a favor, and they don't feel good about themselves. And a lot of firms too, where they have, non-equity partners and things without business. Sometimes, it's amazing. When I started, I would see some of these large law firms compensating these senior attorneys without business, like lower than they might a mid-level associate. So they felt badly about themselves. So in large cities at the time, these attorneys were being told, and this is 20 years ago, that they needed at least $2 million in business if they were going to be marketable as partners to other firms. In smaller markets, the number that they were told that they would need would be the 500,000 to $1 million. These attorneys most often didn't have any business, and you come to them and you'd ask them what they have, and they'd say, 50 to 100 or 1 to 200,000. And so most of these attorneys would actually feel very hopeless, and they would, instead of looking for jobs in law firms, they would look to go in-house into the government and to other places. And one of the things I just want to say too at the start is, a law firm actually is a much more, for most attorneys, can actually be much more stable, because you can practice in law firms, well into your 60s or old, when you're older, and going in-house, that's just not the case. And the government, the same thing. So if you know how to look for a job and find jobs in law firms, you're often going to do, much better and have a much longer career trajectory, even if you don't have business. And so, this is what attorneys do, though. They conclude that there's no option for them because they don't have enough business. They conclude that law firms won't hire them. And so they believe that, they have to do something else, and they can no longer work in law firms where, a law firm, you get to do sophisticated work, much more sophisticated usually when you're working in-house. You get to have some career stability if you find the right place, but this is kind of what happens. And so people think that the only thing they can do is go in-house or leave the practice of law entirely. And, I've seen I see it every day because I review resumes, but people do things like, we'll take positions like answering questions at Lexis. I've seen this for people that have been partners or senior associates about legal search techniques, or sometimes they'll set up these kind of weird solo practitioner positions, out of their home. They use a PO box, and we'll just be doing like work for friends and some little things. Or They'll take positions inside of companies, sometimes not even really doing law practice, really. Making like 20% of what they were making, or positions with a government that are just kind of like contract or whatever, that have nothing to do really with practicing law or challenges, or but often their resume, they'll have no work and they'll sit there waiting months or sometimes more than a year or two trying to find a job because they don't know how to look for a job. I'm going to tell you how to look for a job today, being unemployed. And none of this has ever really made a lot of sense to me. It never will, because I'm able, to get people like this jobs. I know what they need to do. But if you're in this kind of position right now, the dumbest thing you can do is to give up and to settle, because you can get a job. Anybody can. There's so many firms out there. It's absolutely insane. If you know how to market yourself, you can give up on a job, and when you give up, and giving up is just crazy, because if you're able to become senior in a law firm, you obviously providing some sort of value, and you have something, and you've learned a skill, and it's very important that you're able to you're able to keep going. And then but if you're good enough to last several years in a law firm, if you remain employed for more than 3 years in any law firm, you're providing value and you have a valuable skill. And so if you're able to do that, you should never give up on your career. You should always keep going. And you just don't want to, give me 1 second here. You definitely, people should not be giving up. Just another point that I just made earlier. There's 25,000 plus law firms in the country, and these are law firms. When I say 25,000, these are law firms with 10 or more attorneys in them. If you look at more than that, there's like over 80,000. And at BCG, like we have, in terms of just our internal database, we have over 85,000 firms, and yet our internal database doesn't even come close to capturing the number of firms that there are. So there's a huge number of firms. And just one of the ways to think about this is, if you are looking, in just your city, there's going to be a lot of firms. But in every state, if you were in New York State, there's hundreds of different municipalities and places all over the state where there's people doing your practice area. There's so many freaking opportunities. I'll do a little screen share probably towards the end of this webinar, but there's so many places you can work. And to me, it's just like, I guess it's kind of a strong example, but it's almost like the Twilight Zone. Like, there's so many opportunities that it just makes absolutely zero sense. In almost every state, there's places you can work for senior in a law firm, and everywhere. So, and there's literally tons and tons of places. So if you're smart enough and talented enough, if you spend over 8 years in a law firm, especially like a competitive one, you're going to be employable in another large law firm. Not a large law firm, but another law firm somewhere, and you will be hired. There's just no question. But everybody in the situation is just not doing an aggressive enough search. So you should never, ever believe anybody that tells you that you're not employable in a law firm, because you are. And if someone says this to you, then they're lazy or they don't know what they're doing. Recruiters will say this because a lot of recruiters will they buy these lists. There's some companies like Leopard Solutions and others that do a very good job monitoring jobs at large law firms. And also they find candidates at large law firms that build lists for recruiters, but they give them jobs at large law firms. And that's the market that they look at. Now, large law firms will not, and they do, but they typically will not hire people without business. But smaller law firms will, and mid-sized law firms will, and firms in markets where there's not a lot of people like you will. And anybody that tells you that you're unemployable does not understand the market. They just absolutely don't. And that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. So if you were unemployable at the last law firm you were at, employable there, it's absolutely insane to think that out of over 25,000 plus law firms, that there's not a place where you're going to be employable. So here's one of the things I like to talk about right now is, the kind of the power of belief and what happens. And, when I was when I was working as a, being a recruiter, I'd see senior associates, partners, other people coming out of large law firms. And my reaction was always, I respect them, that they're employable, because they were the sort of people I used to work for that would give me instructions. I felt like I could, help these people. I had respect for them. When I had been an associate, anybody that was senior than me that knew more, I would respect. And so, when I went to work for these people, I literally, would give them everything I had. I would get on the phone, I would call firms, I would meet with firms about my candidates, some, personally. I would write these long letters about what a great attorney these people were. And I would still hear, from these attorneys, they would just say, I don't think anybody's going to be interested in me. I would tell them they were. And I would be coaching these people. I would be coaching attorneys that had, 20 years of experience, even though I've been practicing law for like 3 years. And I would tell them that they needed to, pick themselves up. They needed to, be enthusiastic. They needed to stop slouching. They need to get in touch with their potential. I would tell them they had a potential. I myself was listening to things that were, trying to keep myself motivated. I'd be reading Tony Robbins CDs or listening to those. I'd be reading inspirational books, and I'd be teaching these attorneys the things that I learned. And because literally the legal profession can make you feel badly about yourself. It can make you feel pushed down. It can make you feel like you're not good enough because you're hearing these lessons from all these people and not realizing that you have potential. And so I would start teaching people this, and I would teach them, how not to think about their careers that's going to drain your potential. And if you are carrying these negative messages, people, it doesn't matter if you're a young attorney just starting out or a senior attorney, you're always going to hear things that are wrong with you. You may hear, you're never going to work in a large law firm because of the law school you went to, or, you're never going to, get these kind of opportunities, that you want, or you're no longer employable in a law firm. And a lot of times people just need this kind of encouragement. I'm trying to give it to you right now because I don't care who you are. I mean, anybody can succeed in the legal field. It's just wide open. It's in terms of working in a law firm. I mean, you can always be employable there, but even if you can always start your own practice, and there's so many things you can do with a law degree. It's a license to basically own a business, but also once you get experience, you're always going to be marketable. And if you don't know what you're doing, then your whole life revolves around large law firms, and it can be dangerous. Large law firms work for large clients, and they have a certain business model that basically means they want clients that are going to just basically open their checkbooks and pay for the hours people are billing, and they will just do that. And that's, if the law firm says they need to do this work, then they'll do it. And the large law firms, large companies need lots of attorneys working on their behalf. They need, junior associates and partners, and these companies are, companies generating billions of dollars a year. Legal services are not like a large portion of what they need to spend. And in order to bring in those kind of business, that stuff, I mean, that's what, credit for bringing in those types of companies typically will fall to the attorney. There'll be one attorney usually that brings it in, and then young attorneys inside of law firms will train to do the work on behalf of these large companies. And large law firms, they require like a certain, level of skill and, the certain way of working on these companies. And what happens is young attorneys that are hired will go to, often in large law firms, will go to good law schools, will do well there. And these sorts of backgrounds are what are shown to general counsels and things about who's working on their behalf. And a large law firm is presumed to attract and hire people of a certain quality, and that's what the clients want. That's what you'd want if you're a large company. But one of the things that happens is these large law firms do not want a lot of senior people sitting around with business. What happens is the law firms, what happens is senior attorneys, if you're a senior attorney without business, you're going to be billing at a rate that's not too far from what another a partner would bill. And so what the law firms like to do is they like to show that they're trying to save money and be efficient by having junior associates and mid-level associates and so forth billing, and then fewer, senior attorneys working on the matter. And if someone's billing out of a high rate, like if you're a senior attorney without any business, I mean, let's just say hypothetically, you might bill out at $12.50 an hour, and then the partner might bill out at $1,500 an hour. Now, billing rates are even higher than that. Partners bill $2,500 an hour, but I mean, that they prefer to have, if there's a high billing rate, the clients typically prefer to have the partners doing the work and not senior attorneys without business. Another thing that's very important to understand, and this is a big part of the dynamic, one of the bigger ones in large law firms and most large law firms in general, is the person that originates the work and does the work makes typically the way different law firms have different compensation methods. But let's say a partner has, if that works out $1,000 an hour, which is low in a large law firm, that wouldn't happen, but they might make 40% of what they bill out at. So if the person bills out $1,000 an hour and then they collect, that $1,000, then if the partner does the work, they might get $400 for doing the work themselves. And then if they give it to someone else, they might only make $150 an hour. So the partners are incentivized to bill as much as they can to their own clients because they make more money than if they give the work to other people. Law firms, another big thing is they have, in order to keep the quality of the work up and people working as hard as possible, they have like an up or out type of thing going on them. And so associates and others will, work very, very hard to try to be partner. They'll bill a lot of hours. And they need a lot of people doing that and working as hard as possible to kind of keep up that system. And typically it's presumed that when you get more senior, you don't have business, you won't want to work as hard. But in addition, they want people to leave. So when you get more senior, they want you to leave, not only because they're not making as much money, but also because they want those same attorneys to go in-house and things and refer business to the law firm. And so that's kind of important. It's how the whole ecosystem works, and the largest law firms kind of want to do that. And that whole kind of business model of up or out was actually started by Cravath, and then Cravath, was one of the first big firms to hire people at very high salaries, and then make it very hard for them to make partner. And then what they would do at Cravath is then they would always send people to work inside of their clients and so forth. So that would kind of keep work coming. And that would be going in-house. And then even if attorneys can bring in clients, oftentimes it's, especially in a large law firm, they're not going to be the type of clients that they want. I mean, large law firms, they want, major US corporations or companies with a lot of money, and they're not going to be interested in smaller clients. They want the largest clients possible. And that's, those kind of clients will just continually write checks. It'll be easy for them to kind of keep money flowing from them, and smaller clients are going to be much more rate sensitive. So when an attorney gets senior, they often conclude they can't bring in these large clients. The law firm isn't giving them a lot of good vibes to stick around. They will most often ask them to leave or tell them they have a certain platform to leave, or they'll give them a couple of years, like in an income partner role to generate business. Or if they have business, they'll be able to keep referring them to them. But it becomes much harder when you get to be a senior attorney to stay in large law firms and even in smaller law firms as well. One of the things that a lot of people also don't understand is, law firms will typically only make you partner if they have to. And what that means is like the value proposition that you offer to the firm, whether it's, your business or in your expertise or whatever, the money you're generating for the firm, the value proposition you offer is much greater than the cost of them making you partner. So you want to be partner in a law firm. It's not, you have to offer like a lot of value, and it certainly can be by working very hard, but it's also typically going to be clients and the ability to support the whole ecosystem that's important. And so, what most attorneys that go to large law firms think is they think that, at some point when they get to around, 10 years of experience, that their career is going to have a stop date, and the law firms make them feel like there's nothing they can do if they don't bring in business. And so what ends up happening is the attorney makes a lot of money in the early part of their career. Like you can make, $500,000-$600,000 a year or more as an associate in large law firms, but they're kind of front loading your compensation. You're not bringing in business. You may be working only on large clients. You can't bring in clients. So you're making all this money sort of at the beginning of your career. And then you're going to be left without clients and all sorts of things you might actually have if you went to a smaller firm. And so what I did with these attorneys that were senior and hadn't, were in a situation where they didn't have business, where they weren't presumed to be offering enough, you know, value to the firms that they were in, is I started, sending these attorneys out like my life depended on. I would work, I would start my day at maybe, 7 in the morning and be working till like 10 or 11 at night. And I would work very hard. I would take these attorneys and I would, instead of just marketing them, if someone was sitting in Chicago and never worked outside of Chicago, I would send them to firms all over the country, Seattle, like all these different markets, Seattle, California, Arizona, Texas, like just all these markets that they never even thought of. And these attorneys would start getting jobs all over the country and in different locations, places they haven't even been to. And a lot of times these jobs were even better than they had before. I can give you so many examples. I had one guy that had been unemployed for 5 years because of some sort of scandal, and he was a securities attorney. And one day and he's just in really bad shape when I met him, and was living in an apartment, and he used to have a big, huge house in Pasadena and lost that, and all these problems. And one day I just happened to see an article about this small law firm that was incredibly busy in Silicon Valley. They were talking about how they just had so much work, and I sent them to them, and they hired him. And another guy that was in Chicago and had been unemployed for a couple of years, and he had this, again, securities law expertise. And I sent him to a firm called Preston Gates and Ellis, which now is part of K&L Gates. And they had a securities attorney there that was leaving to go be Bill Gates' personal securities attorney. And so they needed someone, and this guy had been unemployed. He got hired. And there's so many examples. I had a guy that was a patent attorney at a big law firm in Denver, and he got to be 65, and they basically that was the retirement date. And he had a special experience working with a certain type of patent. And I was able to find a firm that did nothing but that, and that was their specialty. And they couldn't believe that they found him, and he couldn't believe that I found them. And it was a firm in San Antonio. The guy had never been to Texas. And so when I was doing all this, I was, working out of a 1,500 square foot house, like sending the seniors attorneys out. And within 4 or 5 months of starting work, I had brought in hundreds of thousands of dollars in placements, like maybe $500,000 just from starting from scratch. And I moved into like a high-rise building in downtown Los Angeles. I hired several recruiters to help me, and it just my entire business and career changed. And other recruiters started seeing me in the market because I was just getting a lot done, and people started knowing who I was. And I would tell other recruiters about this, and they would, no one would believe me. And my business just continued to grow by placing these type of attorneys. I mean, back then, the fee for each of these attorneys I was placing might be like, $75,000. But just think if I, placed 10 of them, that'd be 50,000 to 75,000. I mean, you're talking about like $500,000 and placing these people that no one had ever been able to place, and no recruiter would ever talk to. And so all this happened to me. I'm just telling you why it happened. It didn't happen because I, was specifically, some incredible recruiter. I guess it was very good, but I didn't know what I was doing. I was just sending these people, to anywhere I could. And I never would have done this had I not, if I knew what I was doing, because people that knew what they were doing weren't doing that. And so even today, and, current year, I mean, I place these type of attorneys all the time. We place them, several times a month, we place people like this. I mean, every week we place people like this. And so, you're talking, in a company like ours, I mean, if we're placing, one of them per week or whatever, I mean, it's, hundreds of thousands of dollars a month in placements and of people that no one else would try to work with because I have a certain method of doing it, which I'm gonna, tell you about. But, it's possible, it works. Anyone without business can get a job, and if the attorney knows what they're doing. Most recruiters believe that people that are senior are, they are without business are marketable, and senior attorneys are marketable, and often, a senior attorney with business is obviously much more marketable, but a senior attorney without business is also marketable. And it's much more difficult if you're a senior attorney without business to get a position. But if you're marketed properly, and if you know what you're doing, then it's all secret, the secrets about how this is done. Obviously, law firms prefer partners with business, so you would too. The reason partners with business, just so you can understand kind of the logic that firms follow, are so marketable is because if an attorney has $2 million worth of business, or 3 million, let's just say 3 million, the law firm pays them $1 million, and that other $2 million is going towards overhead for the firm. It's going towards partner profits and all these things, and it gives the law firm a lot of consistent cash flow coming in from one attorney that's very, very attractive to them. So all law firms function based on their ability to have other attorneys, have attorneys bringing in business and fees. I mean, that's how a law firm works. I mean, now obviously they need people to do the work, but partners will do the work, and then extra work that flows off. If the attorney has $3 million in business, I mean, there'll be associates given work and other people, just how the business of law works. What we do is, we, have a lot of people, and we also use, computerized ways of doing it. It's called whatever, doesn't matter. But we take all the openings that we find, and we can see all these patterns and stuff. And we know the law firms that have consistently interviewed senior people like this. And then we have, information about firms that have done this in the past. And there's lots and lots of these firms. And so, the idea is, we can find firms that, there's lots of places that will hire senior attorneys without business. And why do law firms hire senior attorneys? And this is just not, I'm kind of talking about, so this should be kind of obvious, but for some people it's not. The attorneys without business, that if a partner has enough work in some firm for senior attorneys and they can't do it all themselves, then they can sell those services to another, to their clients. So their clients will have them do the work and pay for it. But so these are the kind of conditions where a law firm will hire senior attorney without business. So the first one is the law firm may lack someone in that geographic area that doesn't have the type of skills that they need. And some legal markets, like if you're in a large legal market, it may be very easy for a law firm to find a certain type of people, but and that would be, obviously New York, Los Angeles and other markets. It's very easy for those law firms to find people. So if they want a securities attorney, or they want a patent attorney, they want a certain type of real estate attorney, there's often a lot of people to choose from. And if they need someone senior, then they can make business a requirement and often, attract the right people. But, if a market, for example, has, if the large market has a opening for someone with 5 to 7 years of trademark experience, it's going to be very easy for them to find it. Lots of people apply to it. And if they don't apply to the job, and recruiters will have people. And even if they want someone with like 5 years of trademark experience, they'll probably find someone. There's just no shortage of people like that. The salary is high enough. It's very easy for them to find people. And, it's a hyper efficient market. So if you're in a major market, then what that means when it's hyper efficient is that the law firm can really find any type of attorney they want. And this can, penalize a lot of times, it can penalize people that are very senior, because the law firm typically, if the law firm has an opening for someone, they're typically going to prefer someone that doesn't have like 15 years of experience. They prefer to hire someone with like 6 or 7, because that person will still trying to make partner. They're more attractive, so law firms will often hire, if a law firm, instead of hiring like a person with 10 years, will hire someone with like 6 or 7 years and then say, oh, you'd be considered a partner after 4 years or whatever. That's what they want. They want people that are younger. They want people that are hungry. They want people that are cheap compared to what they might have to pay another senior attorney. So that's just how kind of the market works. And large markets, that's what they'll hire. They won't typically look for senior people. They'll try to hire younger people. But there's all sorts of markets around the country where there are not a lot of people, and where there are not a lot of people with different expertise. And with a law firm, if they need someone or doesn't have the luxury of, and won't be able to attract someone with 5 to 7 years or whatever it is, they will literally, if you're in some sort of expertise, will hire whoever they can get. And what are the markets where I see that all the time? I see markets like Syracuse, Grand Rapids, Michigan, Orlando, Florida, Minneapolis, which is a decent sized market, but there, Madison, Wisconsin, Sacramento, Portland, Columbus, Ohio, and all these other markets like that. And, there's even much smaller markets in those, but markets where there's just not a lot of people with whatever the specialty is that the attorney has. I saw another one like Fort Wayne, Indiana recently, and there's just not a lot of people with any type of expertise that you might have trying to work there. So that might mean your securities attorney, that might be your trademark attorney, that might mean your environmental attorney, or risk attorney, or tax attorney, whatever. But if those firms in those markets have clients that need the type of work a senior attorney might do, then they'll get hired. And I see this all the time. I see senior attorneys get positions in markets they've never been to, in smaller markets, and moving from I saw one person move from Indianapolis to San Antonio, never been to Texas. I think it was an ERISA attorney, different types of immigration attorneys. Sometimes, people can move all over the country if they're senior attorneys when they find a market where there's just not a lot of them. And that's very important. So, large firms in those markets may have large clients, and you just never know. And those clients will need sophisticated legal services, and they don't have a large bench of people to choose from. So they're eager for, outsized talent, even when they don't have openings. And I get firms all the time that contact us. We had one in Okemos, Michigan recently, we had another one in Muskegon, Michigan. And these firms just have an impossible time attracting people, even for basic practice areas like just commercial litigation or personal injury or whatever criminal law, whatever the practice area is. Or corporate generalists or real estate attorneys, like they're sitting there and they're trying to attract people, and it's very, very hard for them. They run ads like LinkedIn and Indeed and all these things for months, and no one applies, and they contact us, and we often don't have people for them, and they get mad at us. And so there's literally all over the country, these small markets, there's these firms that are just desperate for people. They can't find people, and they when they approach us, and quite honestly, we don't always find people, and then they're angry with us. So I have people that are senior attorneys that are smart enough to apply to jobs in these markets, and they get interviews, because the law firms don't have people like them. They certainly can't say, like they would in New York, well, I need someone with 5 to 7 years. They'll say, like, I need anyone with this kind of work. I had one woman that was a trademark attorney for the Greenberg Trog, I think, in Las Vegas, and she was senior and had to move to some other state, and so they couldn't keep her employed there because they would have had to pay taxes in that state and everything. And she got a job in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Never been to Grand Rapids, didn't got a job there. And the largest, firms in smaller markets often will be serving major clients. And Rochester, New York's one example. Like they've got Xerox and Kodak and all these things. And Grand Rapids, Michigan is like Steelcase, and Minneapolis has 3M. And obviously Seattle, which isn't a huge market, a lot of people think about it. It's like Microsoft, Amazon, and Boeing. Well, they don't have Boeing anymore. Boeing's in Chicago, but Portland has Nike, Charlotte has Bank of America. There's all these markets that people just don't think about. Because these are large clients there, these regional law firms need sophisticated attorneys who, are senior and can do the work. They don't have business. And there's markets like this all over the country that people just don't think about. I'm talking right now about mid-sized cities, but you get into smaller cities, it's the same thing. And, if those firms, markets in those law firms in those regions, there's just so many regions, but the idea is that if you apply to firms in smaller markets where there's not a lot of people like you, then there's going to be a big demand for you. I see people like in Idaho, like get jobs at big places. I've said it's just crazy. I've never been there. And then there's just so many law firms around the country that anybody that's senior has the ability to get positions in, because there's just not enough attorneys like them there. And that's just something to think about. It doesn't even matter, by the way, if you're a senior attorney. Maybe you're, a more junior attorney, and you're trying to find a job, have 3 or 4 years of experience doing something. There's always going to be markets around the country that are interested in you. The other thing is, we run large markets. There's always going to be, and I see this regularly in New York, I see it in other large cities, but there's always going to be, up and coming firms in large markets. And so what does that mean? There's there's break-off firms that are starting. People will break off of a large law firm, and they'll start their own firm. and they'll bring over these, they'll bring over these larger clients to do work, and they'll need senior people. They don't have this kind of whole up or out thing with associates yet. They're a newer firm. And so they will often bring in senior attorneys because they want to look like they have a deep bench of people so they can attract large clients. And they'll talk about how this person worked at this big law firm, went to these great law schools, and they'll bring in senior attorneys to up and coming firms. And that helps them pitch work to clients to say that they have this deep bench of people. So senior attorneys, they get, hired by these kind of law firms all the time. It happens. And I've seen it a lot in Silicon Valley. I see it in every major city. I see it in New York. I placed a woman recently that was doing investment management. It was like kind of the same thing. Like she'd been unemployed for quite a while. Like I think she'd worked at like Decker, big firm doing investment management, and then didn't have her own business or work, and then ended up leaving, and then was kind of running the solo practice out of her house. And I got her a position at one of these kind of up and coming firms. It was new. I think it was a guy that had broken off from Skadden, as a senior associate or something, started his own firm. But anyway, he hired her, and it was a good position. These startup firms often are people, when they do break off of firms, sometimes they break off and take clients with them, or they're just very, very good at business generation. And then when they are trying to pitch work, they're always excited about having a senior attorney there, or multiple senior attorneys that look very good on paper, because they can say, oh, I've got this and this and this person. It makes the clients feel like they can do the work. So a senior attorney can fit into those roles, and it may not mean they're going to make the highest salary there, but the upstart firm always, wants to keep its costs down. So it will establish itself and looks good on paper. And, it's usually not very difficult to find these kind of firms in various markets. Recruiters can find them. You can find them by reading news articles and things and searching for them about firms, new firms that are starting. There's usually always going to be stories about them. You can find them just by researching, typing in boutique, whatever the market is in your practice area, in your city. And, it's interesting too, because what will happen a lot of times is people will join these little startup firms, and the startup firms end up merging into larger firms within a few years. I mean, it's very funny. Like sometimes you'll place someone at like this startup firm of like 15 attorneys, and then they'll go there, and then suddenly, the firm will merge into a larger firm, and they'll keep them around for whatever reason, and they're partnering in a larger firm again. The other thing is too, that's important is, the more specialized you are, if you're specialized, what that means is that you're in some sort of practice area where there's not a lot of people like you. And so if you have rare skills, and I can talk about practice areas that would give you rare skills all day long, but if you have very rare skills, those skills are going to be in demand in the market somewhere. So that means, you have some certain type of specialty that you do. Patent attorneys is one example. Patent attorneys are always, especially the ones that are in, do very specific type of patent, are always employable somewhere in the country. Any patent attorney can get a job. I mean, a lot of patent attorneys that I talk to will say, I've been looking for a job for a year and I haven't found anything, and that sort of thing. But typically those patent attorneys are only limiting themselves to a certain market. Like I was talking to a guy in Florida, and he was, there's not a lot of places doing patent law in Florida. And so I was like, well, you need to expand your search nationally. I think you got a job in Boulder, Colorado. I mean, it's just, you have to look at a lot of different places. And so if someone's a patent attorney, I can almost always find them a place if they have some very unique skill that they're doing. I placed, like I told you earlier, a patent attorney was forced to retire, found him a job, and, very quickly, he, had been, it was if, the firm I played almost had been, wanted to meet him his entire career, because they were, experts in what he did, and he wasn't meeting a lot of people like that in the course of his career. So, all practice areas like this, I mean, food and drug law, ERISA, international arbitration. International arbitration is a little bit harder. Trust in the states, franchising, tax, corporate, different types of corporate, litigation specialties. Insurance coverage is one of those practice areas that a lot of times is marketable all over the country. So these are just some examples of kind of niche practice areas, but there's always like niche practice areas within within litigation, family law attorneys. I saw the strangest thing happen to one of our family law attorneys. We had a family law attorney, and I think she was in Denver too. And she was moving to southern Wisconsin, some city there that wasn't a large city. And we just did like a radius search around the county of where that city was and sent her to maybe 20 firms. And she was like someone that had probably, again, she's in her 50s. So she probably had 25 years of experience. And she got like out of those 20 firms, I think 5 of them interviewed her. I mean, even though she wasn't licensed in Wisconsin or anything like that, she got all these interviews. She got the interviews because she was, they just didn't see a lot of senior family law people like that. They needed someone with experience. I mean, there's a small county and not a lot of firms there that did the work. And when someone came along, and were very enthusiastic. It's family law. I mean, that's not a practice area, where you think all these kind of interviews would be happening for someone, but not even experienced in family state law. I mean, in the statement that happened. So regardless of your practice area, if you have something, if your practice area is, if you're a specialist, something, meaning you're not doing hopefully like litigation, corporate and real estate, you have some sort of specialty, it's not going to be that difficult for you to find a position if you know how to do a search and where to look. And then, the thing is that all law firms, any law firm will hire an attorney without business, if they have decent sized clients where, they can put in, senior attorneys with high billing rates. And so, in practice areas like corporate bankruptcy and so forth, there's law firms in, New York or Washington, DC that will regularly hire attorneys, that are specialized in a given practice area. If the law firm represents, large clients in that practice area, they're often going to need senior attorneys at that level because the clients will be willing to pay. I see, all these practice areas, you have like, equipment finance and, or aviation finance and all these practice areas where I see regularly like attorneys that, 20 years of experience will get hired with like, these top firms, when there's a lot of work. Now they typically won't keep them around for that long. It's not like, or whatever, they don't keep them around that long, but meaning like less than 5 years, but they can get jobs in major US law firms. They're law firms that have, huge bankruptcy matters that won't have enough people when they're working on a major bankruptcy, or a couple of them will hire some senior bankruptcy attorneys, and they just need people. Even if they, don't have business, they need people. And so senior attorneys can get work with those firms. There's law firms that may do, huge class actions and need people to defend them. Securities litigation, they may need lots of people. Corporate, they may need, and then just talking about large markets. I mean, all these sorts of things. And so, these are just some of the examples of people that get hired, but literally any senior attorney can usually find something if they're geographically flexible, if they're in some sort of practice area that's in demand, and if they can find these niche and growing, these small firms that are starting up. There's always, these are just some of the opportunities that I'm pointing out to you. And these are a huge number of opportunities. And these opportunities, by the way, exist for you, even if you're an associate, as long as you have some sort of experience, something, that's marketable, like a practice area, you're going to be marketable. So here's the reason that senior attorneys without business often do not get positions. So when a senior attorney loses their job or believes that their, experience in a law firm is over, one of the things that complicates their search is whether or not they're willing to be flexible, whether or not they're willing to look in different areas of the country, and then whether or not they, believe in themselves enough to go after a new position. A lot of times people just feel defeated and they don't think, that they just don't think they can do it. They're often afraid to look at a lot of firms. They think that makes them something wrong with their brand. And, they just don't believe that they can get a new position. And they're also not flexible. They just believe they can only be in one market and all this sort of thing. And I think probably, when I talk to a senior attorney, I will make the recommendations I'm making to you right now, which is basically you need to apply to every possible place you think, could have an opening for you. And many times those numbers may astonish you. I mean, you're not talking about like 50 firms, you're not even talking about like 100, but you may need to approach hundreds of firms in different markets to see if they have an opening. If they do have an opening, meaning they're not going to necessarily have a published opening, but they will take a look at a resume and they'll think, wait a minute, like we have all this work we could give to this person and make money. And you can't find those places easily. You have to really get out there and you have to apply to them. And people, when they see that, what they need to do, they often get spooked. They think that, it's just not going to work. And so they decide, not to proceed with their searches and they don't follow my recommendations, even though, I'm being completely honest about what you need to do. If there's, again, there's tens of thousands of law firms in the country. And out of those tens of thousands, there's always gonna be thousands that, could use someone like you, and you need to approach them. So here's, kind of the rules. You need to be able to look at lots of markets and you need to be willing to apply to lots of places. So my father, when I was 15, was trying to work on, trying to advance his career. So he moved with my family and I to Bangkok, Thailand for a job. That's where he got a job. And so I moved to Bangkok, Thailand with my dad. He was flexible in terms of the places he would work, and he got a job that paid a lot more. He was very happy with it. I've worked with attorneys. I'm thinking about an international arbitration attorney I worked with. He lost his job at a big law firm in Washington, D.C. So he worked at this big law firm for like 12 or 13 years. He was in international arbitration, maybe not even 12, maybe like 9 or 10 years. He went to University of Chicago Law School, was a very smart guy, had a perfect record. He'd only worked at one law firm, but kind of a sad story. So he couldn't find another job. He looked at all the places. Anytime there was an opening that came out in Washington, D.C., he would apply to it. He, tried to get jobs in other parts of, with other international arbitration jobs, and he couldn't get one. He decided, okay, well, if my legal career is over, I'm going to become a doctor. So he went and he took all the classes you need to be able to go to medical school. And he took the MCATs and did well. Then he applied to all these medical schools. He didn't get into them because they didn't like the fact he'd been an attorney first. He didn't get any law schools. Became a bartender. Yeah, been a bartender for a couple of years. I saw his resume and he ended up getting a position in international arbitration from, one of the top law firms in the world, but working in Saudi Arabia. And all the interviews and everything happened to resume. So he found a place, and a place you'd never think of working, Saudi Arabia. Obviously, never been to Saudi Arabia. He didn't know anything about Saudi Arabia, but he was flexible and got a job that paid more than he was making before in Saudi Arabia. That's the only place you get a job. But that's what happened. Being a bartender to get into a position in Saudi Arabia, just absolutely amazing. I was, this is the guy we're talking about, been working as, bartender. And I worked with a guy who was from Australia. His family was in New York City. He did some sort of corporate related work. He couldn't find another job in the US. And so he ended up, didn't want to go to work at this. He got this interview with this firm in Grand Rapids, but he didn't go on the interview because he thought, he, should be in New York and everything. And this was anyway, he thought that the city might be inhabited by lumberjacks. So he didn't take the interview. Then he ended up losing his visa, and his family still live in New York, and he had to move. So, the point is, like, this guy could have been happily employed for the rest of his career in Grand Rapids, Michigan. He didn't go on the job interview because he thought he should be in this cosmopolitan city. He couldn't find another job in New York City. So he would have gotten that job, but instead he didn't go on the interview. Then he lost his visa and went back to Australia without his family. But the point is, you need to get a job. Anybody that's senior needs to be willing to look at where the work is, and the work is not always going to be in the city that you're in. You have to go where the work is. It's just what the legal profession's about. If you're a lot of business, then you obviously can stay where you're at. But if you don't, you need to go where the work is. This point applies to associates. It applies to law students. You always need to find a place that's going to hire you, and it's not always going to be in a major city. And I've done some reports. I don't have them. Some of them I haven't published yet, and I've been working on for a longer time. But it's very interesting. The total career earnings of someone that goes to like a mid-sized market or a small market is often much better than someone that goes to a major market, because you make all this money earlier in your career, but then you drop out when you don't become a part and you do something else that doesn't pay as much. Whereas someone that goes to a smaller mid-sized market continues working in law firms throughout their whole career. So they may have gone to like Syracuse Law School and been in the middle of their class and then take a job in, I don't know, Ithaca, New York or something. And then when they're a young attorney, maybe make half of what a senior associate or a junior associate making a big New York City law firm. But they keep practicing in Ithaca their whole career. And they actually end up making a lot more over the course of their career than someone that goes into major cities. But you need to go where the work is. You need to be willing also to look at a lot of places. So people don't think about these numbers and how many firms there are out there, but people get spooked. If I tell an attorney, like, you should look at 500 to 1,000 firms in your practice area around the country, when they get completely spooked. They think that this is crazy, even though all you're doing is just marketing yourself to places that could use you. I mean, I tell this story a lot, but I go into my mailbox every day. And when I go into my mailbox, it's filled with junk mail about all sorts of things. It'll be like roofing and, I don't know, new floors and all these different things. And 99% of that stuff I ignore. But if I'm in the market for a new roof, like say I needed a new roof and I saw something like that, I would call these people. And of course I would. So, but they may have to send 10,000 of those letters to get one job or something, but it ends up paying for itself. So it's the same thing with you. Like, you need to apply to a lot of places. Now, I'm not saying you just apply to random places. You apply to places that have work, people in your practice area, but you can always find someone with work in your practice area. And so this is how, the business works. You just find a place that has the work. And if a law firm has the work, if a law firm thinks they can pay you $300,000 a year, they have over $1 million in work that they can give you, then they're going to be very happy to bring you in, because they can make a lot of money from you if they have the work. You never know who has the work. It's very difficult to find these people with the work. I mean, I found this one firm was just kind of I don't know what happened. It was a law firm in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and they were bringing in all this corporate M&A work, but like big corporate M&A work. You would never think that this would be happening in Fort Wayne, Indiana. And they just couldn't find anybody to work for them. And I sent them a woman that had worked in a law firm in Delaware as a litigator, and had lost her job for whatever reason after a year. Then had set up a solo practice, helping law firms around the country file various corporate documents that they needed if they had corporations they were working for in Delaware. Anyway, she did this for about a year with her own practice, and it was fairly successful. And she got a job as a corporate M&A attorney without any corporate training or anything like this in this firm in Fort Wayne, Indiana. So I mean, but she never would have. Who would think to apply to a law firm in Fort Wayne, Indiana? Which I did for her, and she got a job there. And I think she got that job because I found out about this firm because I had someone in Indiana. I encouraged them to look at a lot of firms, and that person got a job. So it's like, this is interesting. This firm has all this work. So I sent her to that firm. So, every senior attorney just needs to understand that all you're doing is you're trying to find places that have work for you. And you just never know. I mean, you really don't. The work could be in a large market. It could be in an upcoming firm that's upcoming in your market. But there's so many different places that people can apply to. All that needs to do is make economic sense for whoever is hiring. I see large U.S. law firms hiring candidates without openings all the time. They will look at the candidate and they'll think, hey, we have all this work, and they don't even have openings, but they will have a business case for hiring the person. This happens. And the idea is that if you knock on a lot of doors, you're going to find somewhere. Law firms may not advertise that they have an opening for someone with 10 years of experience, but if they have enough work and attorneys are drowning in work and they need people, the partners can't do it all on their own. If partners would rather do business development and have other people, you just don't know. And most of the time, you're not going to see openings like that advertised. So you need to apply to a lot of places. And people think, oh, it's undignified to apply to places without opening. It hurts my brand or whatever. But, I submit to you that not working is even less dignified than applying to a lot of places. No one cares if they see your application and they can't help you. They don't think it's a bad thing. They just conclude that they don't have work for you. And other thing that's kind of interesting too, and I'm just going to say this as a side, but at BCG, the substantial number of placements that we make are, and this is a very important point that I talk about in our materials with candidates when they come to us and all these different ways, but you're much more likely to get a job when you apply someplace that that suddenly believes that they have a need for someone with your skill set and so forth, and you're the only applicant, you're much more likely to get a job with a firm that sees you and sees your application and thinks they can make money off you than you are if you apply to an actual job opening. If you apply to an actual job opening, there's going to be a lot of applicants usually. Now, depends on the market size and everything. But when I say there's going to be a lot of applicants, I mean, an opening in a large city could attract 100 people. I mean, and so out of those 100 people, you have to be the absolute best looking on paper, and they might interview 2 or 3 people, and then you have to be the best person to interview. It's much harder to get a job when there's an opening. You apply to a place without an opening, there's not other applicants. So if they think they can make money off you and they bring you in without any other applicants to choose from, it's much easier to get a job. So that's how it works. The firms do not receive a lot of unsolicited applications. So if they receive an unsolicited application, like, wow, this is interesting. Like, well, look at this person. Maybe we could use them. Wow, they thought of us when they were applying, and they actually like you better. And it's almost less threatening than if you're applying for a job opening, because they suddenly see you and they like you. They like you thought of them. And they're more likely to bring you in. This is how we make most of our placements, because it's very easy. Like if someone is the only applicant and get an interview, then there's not a lot of competition. The law firm's much more likely to hire them. The interview. Now, it doesn't mean that's going to come easy. You have to do the work or let BCG do the work for you, but you just have to apply to a lot of places and a lot of markets with a lot of openings. And then the other thing too is, when I'm working, with senior attorneys, the search often can take some time. So they will apply to an initial set of firms, often in their own city, and they won't have any luck, and they'll conclude the BCG is doing something wrong, or I'm a bad recruiter, and then they'll quit, and then they'll get discouraged. And after weeks of not getting interviews, or because they got no interviews at all, they'll be discouraged. And so because they're discouraged, they will stop approving the opportunities we send them. Associates do this too, and they will think that nothing's going to happen, even though all it takes is one firm to bring you in and hire you. It just takes one. And so they don't understand that you need, every time that you apply to more places, you're increasing your odds. And you need to often be prepared, for a long search. Now, if you're not being aggressive or allowing BCG to be aggressive, and you're just kind of approving little batches of firms and so forth, it can take a long time. But if you go all out and you do it, you're gonna get something, and you have to persevere, and you have to be aggressive in your search. And the more open you are to a longer search, the better your odds are going to be of finding a position. And the market isn't going to act as enthusiastically. Like if you're a 4th or 5th year associate looking for a position, there's going to be a lot of demand for someone like you. There's a lot of openings. The firms are more likely to hire you, but and it's a better business proposition for them than often if you're a senior attorney with no business. So you have to be prepared for the long search. You have to be prepared for not getting the best reception from places. And there's just all sorts of reasons that law firms prefer younger people. You understand that the younger person is going to have lower billing rates, so that's attractive to clients. The younger person is going to want to make partners, so they're going to work very hard. They're not often going to have these like large families and think they're families and all these things. They're not going to be jaded. They're going to be enthusiastic and bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. And where there's a senior attorney, they may think is not going to be as enthusiastic because they haven't made partner and everything. So they're kind of the damaged goods type of way of looking at them sometimes. Oftentimes they're worried about if they hire the person, they don't work out, they're going to get sued for age discrimination. There's all these things that hurt you when you're a senior attorney. So you do need to look at a lot of places, because I'm just telling you, that's what people think. People think, oh, this person's jaded. Oh, this person, could sue us if it don't work out. Oh, this person, why are they unemployed? Were they doing bad work at their old firm if they're unemployed? So there's all these negative ways of looking at you, but you always can find someone that's going to be positive, because there's firms sitting around. They may have had an opening for someone with experience in some sort of FDA law for months, not got anybody. You come along and you're like the only applicant that's halfway decent they got. You're senior, even they're looking for a 7th year, and they'll bring you in. So you just need to find a firm that can do that. And you need to find a firm that has clients that are willing to pay someone to do the work at a higher billing rate. I often see law firms that don't have anyone doing a certain type of work, and they may be actually referring someone out that does that type of work. They may have to refer it to another firm. Like an example would be I was working with someone that does aircraft regulatory work. I mean airport regulatory work or something, and didn't have any, and had this client, but there was no one in their firm that could do it. So they were referring it out to someone else. Now, if someone came along that had experience that was related to airport regulatory work, who was senior and applied to that firm where this guy was referring all this work out, he would be happy as a client. So that would make him very happy and they would hire him. So, but instead of him having to refer work, so this kind of dynamic is just going on in all these firms. And then you have to be aggressive. And, just because you're not finding a job right away means you just have to find someone that needs that. And so you just, when you stick out with these type of searches, and don't give up, you're just, you can do very well, but you have to persevere. You need to be aggressive. So that means applying to lots of places and lots of markets. And this is just what it means. And so, and you can't, like, people think their egos hurt, like they're applying for all these positions and no one's interested in them. And all of the only thing that's happening has nothing to do with you. It's a simple business proposition. Like, do we have work for this person that does real estate finance with strip malls? I mean, just giving you an example, real estate finance, financing strip malls. Do we have a need for someone like that? That's a very niche specialty. And, so if there's no one, the firm doesn't have a need for anybody like that in their current market, you can't find a very current market. There's always going to be, if you look at enough markets, someone that will need experience with someone that does real estate strip malls, that has work for that they don't have enough people doing it, or they want to get that kind of business, or they have clients that will give it to them, but they can't do it because they don't have someone senior. So it's impossible to find someone like that, a place like that, unless you're applying to enough firms. So, I mean, you'd have to apply to firms with real estate practices and so forth. But I mean, that's kind of, and then, if you're not using a recruiter, I mean, I'm just saying, if you have a recruiter, you need someone who isn't lazy, who has the resources to send you to a lot of places, that isn't just working with the best people, the easiest people to come along. So what most recruiting firms do, if you apply to almost any one of them around the country, send them your resume, their experience is going to be working with attorneys with 2 to 6 or 7 years of experience that went to big, good law schools, that are working at big firms. That's what they do. So that's how the recruiting industry works. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, that it's no different than, if you're a salesperson, you don't want to sell cars at a dealership that, where people don't want to buy the cars. You want to go to a dealership where people want to buy the cars, hopefully expensive cars, because you make big commissions. Since this is just, how it works. Salespeople do whatever they can easily make money doing. So most recruiters will not work with people that are senior. So, I'm not saying you work with us. I'm just telling you, if you find a recruiter, you need someone that's able to send you to a lot of places. And just because you're senior also with your existing firm and where you've worked didn't bring any business, doesn't mean you can't do that at another firm. Oftentimes, I mean, all it takes is moving to a firm that's smaller, that has lower billing rates, will allow you to bring in other types of clients. I mean, it's not that difficult. But what I do when I'm representing someone is I'm going like all in, and the recruiter needs to do that. But one of the points I would make is that, we do this with a lot of researchers and so forth, but you can easily do it yourself. And what does that mean? I guess I'll do a screen share in a few minutes to show you what that means. But you can easily find, regardless if you're an associate or senior, you can easily find places that do whatever type of work you want to do all over your state, all over the country. If you don't currently have a job, and you need to be very aggressive, and you need to be going out and looking at a lot of places, which I'll talk to you about. And, the odds are for most senior attorneys often is that a lot of times when they do find a job, if they've been at a big firm, they go to a mid-sized firm and they go to another market, it's often their job's much better, because instead of being in a place where they're being pushed out or whatever, when they're hired by a new firm as a senior attorney, the firm has a place for them, and needs them, and is bringing them in despite all this. And so there's like a fit, whereas there might not have been a fit at the place they're at before, but they find a new place and there's a fit. And when a large law firm or whatever the law firm is lets a senior attorney go, that's because there's not a place for them. So when you find a place that needs someone like you, there's a place for you, and that's going to be much more stable. They're not bringing someone in, because they don't need them. The large law firms pushing someone out because they don't need them. But you find another or mid-sized or small law firm doesn't, but you find another place that needs you, that's going to give you a lot more employment stability. And you're often being hired sometimes when you're brought in to work for and the only attorney in that practice area. So they don't have anybody else and they need you. You're essential. And so you're often going to be much better off in one of these new firms than you were in your last. And so, I guess the final points I would tell you is that any senior attorney, regardless of who you think you are, can continue your career in a large law firm or a smaller mid-sized law firm if you don't give up. There's always going to be a law firm out there that needs you. The law firm that hires you could be anywhere in the world. The law firm that hires you next will have a need for you. So you're going to be much more likely to be kept around. You're going to be essential when you find that firm, but you do need to look at lots of markets. You need to look at lots of firms. You need to realize your search could take a long time. If you need a recruiter, it won't give up on you, but you could be your own recruiter, which I'll show you in a few minutes. You don't need necessarily to do all this yourself. I mean, to rely on a recruiter, you can do it all yourself. And the more specialized you are, the easier it's going to be. So the more specialized attorney, if you find a firm that needs someone like you, it's very hard to find someone like you, then you're going to be in very good shape and your job's probably going to be better than your last. And, it makes me sad and it makes me mad that so many people that become senior kind of give up on their careers and their lives, and they're depressed. And I see it all the time. I mean, I see people, they become a partner in a large law firm and then they're given a couple of year, run to generate business. They don't generate business and then they lose their job and they go in house or they take these jobs that they don't like and they're unhappy. And it's just all really, really unfortunate. And people don't really know what to do, to find their next job. And they don't market themselves aggressively enough. They don't look at enough markets. They don't understand how to do the research. They let their egos get in the way of finding new places. They don't get out there and market themselves the way they should. And so, I mean, that's what you need to do. And you need to make sure that you're marketing yourself as well as you could. Now, most people that do this, won't necessarily use a recruiter. I'm not saying you have to use BCG if you're senior. You probably, the odds are, more than 25%. You might not buy into exactly what we're doing. Most people may limit themselves to job openings. You certainly can look at job openings. If you do, you should look at job openings all over the country. People limit themselves to that. But then most people aren't willing to do the kind of research that's necessary in order to find enough firms to hire them. Now, this is for an associate, it's for partners, it's for anybody that thinks that they can't get a job, that's depressed and beaten down and like doesn't, anybody can. So, so that's kind of that. I'm going to show you just real quickly. I want to show a few ways that what people can do when they're sort of in the situation to try to find a job, because a lot of people don't understand that. Or how do you find firms that are willing to hire you? So let me just pull something up real quick and then we'll go to questions. I don't have a ton of time for questions today just because I'm going on a trip and I have to put some flight. See, but I wanted to get this done before okay, so here's kind of an example like that's just kind of very simple that I'll show you in terms of like how do you find a job. So let's say you're in California. So let's go list of cities in California. So I would say municipalities, because municipalities, what is this? Municipalities. Okay. So this is a list, just an example of cities in California. So you can sort these by population. Let's see, so you've got like Los Angeles with 4 million people, but you start getting down here and looking at these cities that maybe, you can see here, I mean, the number of cities is, how many cities is this right here? I mean, it's huge. I mean, there's just an incredible number of cities. What is this? I mean, I don't even know how many there are. How many are there? This list doesn't say, I guess, standard. Okay, so there's all these cities in California. And so what most people do when they're looking for a job is they may be in Los Angeles, they look in Los Angeles, or they may be in San Diego, so they look there. They may be in San Jose and Silicon Valley, so they look there. But you start getting down into, and a lot of these like down here kind of suburbs of Los Angeles, but you start looking at kind of these, different cities and different markets. And, what is Vacaville or Hesperia? So Hesperia is kind of this weird area, small population. It's kind of in the desert. But, if you were a corporate attorney, this is just an example. I mean, you could look at all these different cities, but even if you were to look at, corporate law firms, that do corporate area in California. So, I mean, if you wanted to look just in despair, this is an example, searching online directories and websites. Okay. So, but you start looking at, all these different things, there's going to be always a lot of law firms in any market. You'd have to kind of go through all these and see who's doing corporate related work, but there's going to be law firms in every market that do whatever your practice area is. So, it's very important to be able to, look at all these different places. So this is what most people don't do. They don't look at enough markets to find, positions. So whatever your practice area is, you could do real estate, you could do all these different, I'm trying to look at kind of, different things here that aren't that popular, like Riverside. There's going to be law firms in every single city and market that do, and what's this next one? Temecula. So there's going to be people in pretty much every market that that do this kind of work. So this law office of Rosenstein, they're business attorneys, they're in Temecula. I can guarantee you that people are not applying. Let me just say practice areas, business formations. People are not applying to this law firm Rosenstein and Associates. They're just not doing it. This is a small law firm in, what is this, Temecula. So there's lots of law firms like this. So if you're a corporate attorney, you think you're employed, I can guarantee you that if you were able to find like 50 of these places, which these are just all, there's a small law firm in Temecula that does this kind of work. Now, I'm not saying you want to work in Temecula, but I am saying that you're always going to find, people in these different cities. And this is a small city that no one, I guarantee you, is applying to work in. You're always immigration. What the hell's this? Practice area, business. Okay, so they say they do business law. So, you could get a job in one of these firms, and this is just one city. But in this Temecula city is what, 100,000, and you have all these different firm size cities that are similar to 100,000. That's just in Los Angeles. This is just in California. So we're talking about just in California. So you can also use ChatGPT sometimes. It's kind of a lot of fun. So you go to like ChatGPT. And then you would look at, can you name, let me see what even city this is. This is in what county? Let's see this county. Let's look at some Solano. Oh, I don't even know where that was. San Mateo. Oh, Fresno. Yeah, Fresno, 120,000. Can you name law firms in Fresno, and they're in Fresno, California, prior to. Let's just talk about real estate. So you have ChatGPT help you right here. It's going to find some places for you. And it doesn't matter what you use. You can use all these different types of, searches. So it's going to give you all these firms that you could have gotten from Google too. I just happened to use this. You can see all these firms. This is just in Fresno. I mean, Fresno is not a big market. It's something that I guarantee you probably 99% of the people in California haven't been. But all these firms here in Fresno do this type of work. So if you were in Fresno or just applied, you were in Los Angeles and applied to all these people and didn't think you could get a job doing real estate, you're wrong. And and this is just one city, it's Fresno with 100,000. Let's sort these by, I think I already sorted by industry, but I just want to give you an example. So how many firms are like Fresno's 100,000? We found all these places in Fresno that do real estate. So if we were to look at and that was just Fresno, right? So we looked at Fresno. So if you starting, with firms of 100,000, I mean, you have, pages and pages of places that, are half of what Fresno is. And then you have, if you were to look at places that had, 1 to 200,000, I mean, it's a huge number. So to me, it's just remarkable that how many firms there are, how many people don't find these firms. These firms are not going to be in various lists and things. They're typically going to be, you're going to have to find them on your own. But this is Fresno. Imagine if you did this for 100 cities. If you did this for 100 cities, you're going to find all these places, and one of those places is likely to be interested in. Okay, so I'm going to take some quick questions. I don't have a lot of time for questions today. So if I don't do your question today, then I will save it and I will answer it next week when we come back. And unfortunately, I just have a limited amount of time for questions, but I hope that this webinar so far has been helpful, just because, we typically, people get very, very defeated in their legal careers, and they don't allow themselves to approach enough firms and enough markets, and they don't do like a wide search. And because they don't do a wide search, they typically get in trouble. And, if you were to like do the search in Fresno, for example, how would you apply to those places? You would go to whoever that seems like the name partner and tell them you do real estate work or whatever. You apply. I mean, it's not that difficult to do. And there's just so many law firms all over the country that do kind of whatever position you may be interested in. Okay, so I'll answer all these questions, and there's quite a few, but I'll do as many as I can. Okay, so what are the benefits of working at a boutique firm versus a large firm? So sorry, I'm not sharing my screen. Okay, so if you work at a boutique firm versus a large firm, typically the boutique firms will give you most often more responsibility. So you get more responsibility in a boutique firm. You'll be working in a boutique firm. Typically, you'll be a specialist in a certain practice area. You may get to do other things you wouldn't get to do in a large law firm. For example, if you're a litigator, you might be able to go to court. You might be able to write more sophisticated motions that senior people might do as an associate. And then you'll have, to some extent, you may have more long-term potential there, meaning you'll have the ability to stay there longer. You'll learn how to bring in small clients. And you may find the boutique firm has less billable hour pressure many times than a large law firm would have. And you may be able to stay there longer and become a partner and stuff in a boutique firm compared to a large law firm. Why is that? Boutique firms often have much lower billing rates. And so it can become often easier to attract clients that way. Boutique firms that can be of different qualities. So a boutique firm that's composed of people that have worked in major law firms before will typically do a certain type of work that might not be done. That they'll be very, very good at the work, and they'll do very high quality work. But sometimes a boutique firm won't be comprised of those sorts of people. So it's typically better to learn early in your career how to, be a good attorney in a large law firm where you're getting exposure to the largest clients. But if you go to a boutique firm that works for large clients and where the quality of work expected is very good, then you're in good shape. Now, what does that mean exactly? What it means is that firms that work on behalf of large clients, often, they will do work. They will go very, very, the work that they do will be extremely high quality because that's what large clients expect. They will look at issues as deeply as they can. They will spend a lot of time on things because the clients are willing to pay for it. And so if you're in that type of environment, you typically become a much better attorney earlier in your career because you're taught to look at things a certain way. If you're not in the type of environment and you're working on clients that can't pay a lot for your work, then the work, depending as little as they'll pay, your work may actually become sloppy. So you need to be in an environment where you're getting training to be, as good of an attorney as you can be. If you go to a boutique firm where that happens, so it's good. Boutique firms, if there's less hours required, that's good. A boutique firm, if there's you're working on behalf of large clients with people that have worked in large law firms, that's good. So you have to understand, what are the trade-offs of a boutique firm versus a major firm? Okay, the next question, how can the insight about law firms hiring senior attorneys without a book of business help me in my legal job search after graduation? Well, the insight is that you need to look at a lot of places that senior attorneys without a large book of business that are searching for jobs will often look at a lot of different firms and find someone that fits them. A lot of times attorneys don't find jobs after graduation. They don't find them because they haven't looked at enough places. Someone will always hire you. I don't care where you went to law school, I don't care what your grades were. Someone will always hire you if they believe that they have enough work, they have enough work for you. Okay, next question. What are the long-term career benefits of taking the judicial clerkship earlier in my career? So a judicial clerkship is good for a lot of different reasons. One of the reasons a judicial clerkship is good earlier in your career is that you will be working for a judge. And when you're working for a judge, you're working for one person, and that person is going to be giving you feedback on how to do good work. They're going to be critiquing your writing, all those sorts of things, and that will hopefully make you a much better attorney early in your career. You're doing it without the pressure of working in a law firm where you could get fired or where the law firm could run out of work. You just don't know. But a judicial clerkship is good for that. Get the experience being trained. Judicial clerkship is also good because it shows you how it works inside of court if you want to be a litigator. So what's interesting is you can watch other attorneys, you can see what attorneys are doing that are good, you can see attorneys what they're doing that aren't good. All that can be very, very helpful, in addition to seeing what different types of attorneys do and how they, work in court. You'll also have the ability to understand how judges rule. So judges will often rule along political lines. A Democratic judge will rule in a certain way on issues, and a Republican judge will rule certain ways in others. So it kind of shows you the inside of the court system, how things work, how decisions are made. And so clerkships are great. They're a smart thing to do. They can also give you relationships with judges that are good throughout your whole career. So they prepare you to be a good writer. They give you insight into the court. You get to watch what other what other attorneys do in court and what makes them effective. You get to read motions from both sides. You get to make decisions. Can be fairly excited. They can be pretty exciting jobs. Okay, next question. How can I handle a toxic work environment at my law firm without derailing my career? So, different work environments are going to be toxic. It's true. So if you're in a very toxic work environment, there's a couple things that you can do. Sometimes you can find attorneys to work with to give you work that aren't toxic. That's one of the big things you can do. And that can be very helpful. You can, if you're in a very toxic work environment, and you don't see things improving, then obviously it's a good idea to look for another firm. Law firms can be toxic for a bunch of reasons. Typically, they may be toxic because the partners there are under a certain type of pressure to do work in a certain way, or they feel like they don't have enough work. You just never know. Or sometimes partners won't be getting along. But if you're in a toxic work environment, then my suggestion is that, the first thing to do is to probably try to look for another job. If you have to stay there for whatever reason, then you try to avoid the people that are toxic. And then if you can't do that, then I guess, you have to figure out how to deal with the environment. And that means not taking stuff too seriously, just putting your head down, doing the work, and not getting involved in the political aspects of things, which you should never do. I've seen partners, by the way, been in a firm like 30 years, and then take sides on some political issue. And then once they take sides in that political issue, if they're on the wrong side of it, then all of a sudden that person might lose their job. So you have to be any firm you go to, you have to be very, careful about getting involved in the politics, especially as an associate. Okay, next question is, what is the best way to transition from litigation to transactional law? So if you want to make a transition from like litigation to transactional law, sometimes people do it for the wrong reasons. So what'll happen is when the economy gets very good, they'll all of a sudden see corporate attorneys getting these great jobs in-house or all this work, and it's like the best thing to do. And so then they'll try to get involved doing transactional law from litigation. But really the differences between litigation and transactional law that are just kind of important to understand is people that are good at litigation typically are people that were good at philosophy, reading, anything to do with reading and writing, whatever, English, things like that. Those are the people that do well in litigation. The people that do well in transactional law are people that probably enjoyed economics and accounting and math, science and things. So they're almost like two different personalities, the people that do the different type of work, and just people that are motivated to think about things in a different way. But if you want to make that transition, you typically would try to do it in your own firm, which isn't easy, but you may be able to do it in your own firm. If you can't do it in your own firm, then you need to find a firm that will hire you to do it. You can't do that through a recruiter. You need to basically apply to firms and tell them that that's what you want to do. But firms typically, if they have if they're looking for someone laterally, then they're going to want to hire someone that has experience in that practice area. So if you were a law firm and you had an opening for a third-year corporate associate, and someone applied that was a litigator and said, I want to be a transactional attorney, that would be a pretty hard sell. So you have to think, like, why would that law firm be interested in hiring someone like me? So people that do that will often move to smaller markets. They will network and try to get jobs like that. It certainly can be done, but typically you'll have to either do it in your own firm, you'll have to network and find someone to hire you, or you'll have to apply to a lot of places and try to make that value proposition. Most people that end up doing that switch are able to do it 50% probably try to do it in their own firm first, and the people that are able to do it have luck doing that. The other probably 30% are able to network and find people that are in that practice area to hire them. And then sometimes the other 20% will apply to markets where there's not a lot of people like them. So I saw a woman that was a patent attorney in Silicon Valley that really wanted to do environmental law. And she ended up getting a job doing environmental law at a mid-sized firm in Sacramento, which is kind of cool. And I don't know exactly how she did it, but she was able to do it by persuading a firm in Sacramento to hire her. She had very good qualification with the University of Michigan Law School and all this stuff, but that was how she did it. Okay, next question. And I apologize for not having a lot of time for questions today, but how can I stand out as a junior associate in a competitive law firm environment? Okay, so the best way to stand out as a junior associate in a competitive law firm environment is to bill as much as you can. It's to get work from partners and have those partners give you repeat work. So you do work for them, and the work is of such quality that they want you to do work for them again. Maybe they like the number of hours you bill. Maybe they like mainly they're going to like the quality of work. You're going to make their job easier, so they're going to want to give you more work. You need to form good relationships with mid-level and senior associates. Mid-level and senior associates will also give you work. They will help you critique work. They will help you understand what partners want that you're working with. They will help you stop. They will prevent you from making mistakes. They will tell you who to avoid and all these different things. So if you do this stuff as a junior associate, the relationships you build with the partners and the work you do for them, the relationships you build with mid-level associates and senior associates are very important. And basically you want to be seen as very, very dedicated, working very, very long hours and doing very, very good work. And that's how you stand out. Next question from a law firm. What are the benefits of hiring partners or counsel without a book of business for our long-term strategic growth? Well, the benefits of hiring a partner without any business are is if they have a specialty in a certain type of thing that you're missing that in, you can market that to clients. You have people that can do that, and that can be very profitable. If you have partners that have so much work that they can't do it all themselves, and it's senior level work, that can make you much more profitable. If you are trying to pitch work to clients and you don't look like you have a deep enough bench of people that are senior that can do the work, then that will help you get new clients. If you have institutional clients that need people that you can cross-sell that type of work to, that will help you. So anytime you can plug someone in that can make you money, then you can hire them. And so that's the long-term benefit. Also, if they don't have any business, that can benefit you because you don't have to pay them as much. And you have people that will do this work at a senior level that aren't going to disappear because they have a large book of business they can take somewhere else. So there's a lot of benefits. A question from a law firm. How can our law firm evaluate senior level candidates who don't bring portable book of business? Well, you evaluate them like you would hire anybody. You would interview them. You would, think if they, are there problems with them? Are they someone that's going to integrate well? So, you evaluate them and just do the job. So, the first one is, you have to look at if the person can do the type of work that they say they can do. So that's kind of the first thing. Can they do it the way you want the work done? Can they do the work? So typically their resume will be loaded with years of experience, so you can tell if they can do the work. The next one is, can they be managed? So a lot of times senior attorneys will resent being managed by younger people. They will they'll think that they know how everything is done. So you have to evaluate them through can we manage them? Did they seem like someone that's going to do what we want them to do and not make trouble? Are they someone that's going to take instruction? And a lot of times the answer to that is no. So you have to be very careful about that. Will they do the job long-term? Means do they show a lot of career stability prior to coming to you? Career stability means that obviously if someone's has a lot of career stability, that means that they did good work wherever they were at before, and people kept them around. They were valuable. If the person doesn't have career stability, then that's something that you need to look at, and they're probably going to be a risky hire. People that move around a lot often will do so because they're not well received at their firm, or there's something wrong with them. Maybe they're an alcoholic. Maybe you just don't know. So do they look like someone that will do the job long term? They will often do the job long term if you hire them because they won't have a lot of other options. So they're going to commit wherever they go. So that's important. But you want to ask yourself, is this someone who's going to stick around? Or are they going to move for the next opportunity? Then the next one is, does the person want the job? Typically, a senior attorney will have a very difficult time finding positions. So if you get them, if you interview them, they're typically they will want the job. And but you need to see, do they really want to work here? Do they have the level of enthusiasm they want? And then the next one is if you like them or not. So you obviously you want to hire someone that matches your culture and all those other sorts of things that works for you. How do I increase my billable hours without burning out? So you increase your billable hours without burning out by doing the type of work that you enjoy. So sometimes people will really enjoy writing. Sometimes people will really enjoy working on a certain type of matter or doing a certain type of transaction. So your work needs to seem like play. It needs to seem like something that when you do the job, it actually energizes you. So there's certain types of work that when people do that work, they're just that gives them like a real, they feel very good. I mean, they're very excited. They enjoy it. So what is it that you enjoy doing? I mean, some people, if you give them a piano, they can sit down and they'll play the piano for 10 hours and they won't know what happened. But you want to try to put yourself in a position where you're doing work that you enjoy like that. Okay, so the final question. If anybody, I'm the last one I can take. I'm trying to take ones that have a lot of variety here. What can I do in law school to eventually become the type of attorney law firms will hire even without a book of business? Well, there's not a lot you can do in law school, but what I would say is sometimes you may have an interest in something, like something may appeal to you. When I was in law school, for whatever reason, I really enjoyed tax law, which doesn't make any sense to me, but I mean, it was something I really, really enjoyed. So if I'd become a tax attorney and didn't have any business, I would still enjoy it. I would love doing it wherever I went. I mean, I just really like tax law. Sometimes people will really like corporate classes, or they might really like, I don't know, contract, whatever it is. But you have to you have to try to find what it is, like what type of practice area really interests you, what gets you excited. And if you're able to do that, then you're often going to be much better off because you would become an expert in something that you enjoy. So what is law school? Law school doesn't teach you how to be an attorney. It's just classes, but sometimes there are certain types of classes and certain types of work that really interest you. And if you're able to find those types of classes and work, you're going to be, things that you enjoy. You figure out what kind of classes do I enjoy the most, and then maybe you should go into doing something that kind of makes you feel empowered. Okay, well, thanks everyone for being on this webinar. I apologize again that I didn't get to all the questions, but I have saved your questions and I will answer them next week. As it's very, very helpful what you learned today. I think so many attorneys, I mean, it's a huge proportion of the legal profession. They become senior and they give up and they don't find jobs. And I think the final point I would make to you is regardless of what level you're at, you can always get a job. There's huge benefits to working in law firms and working in other practice settings. Every day, like there's all these government attorneys that have lost their jobs because of new administration. I see people that go in-house and they're only working there for like a couple of years and then they lose their jobs and they're unemployed for a long time. If you can find a law firm that can use you, then you're going to you can have a very long career. Law firms make money. So if you're billing out 1,000 hours a year or 2,000 hours a year, and you're billing out $1,000, that's $2 million. And a law firm, could pay you $300,000 or $400,000 or whatever. And if you have expertise in a certain practice area, you're always going to be employable because you're a profit center. If you're in the government, you're not a profit center. If you're in house, you're not a profit center. There's all these jobs that people take that they don't understand how limiting they can actually be for the long-term career. So I encourage everyone to try to stay in law firms. I encourage everyone to look at a lot of markets. Attorneys that work in smaller markets and smaller firms typically have more satisfying long-term careers than people that don't. So that's something to think about. Working in a smaller market where there's not a lot of people like you gives you a huge competitive advantage because all the work will come to you. Finding a firm that has a place for you will help you. So I hope this has been helpful. I will do the rest of the questions on next week, and have a good rest of your week. Thank you.